Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere dry, dusty, and delightfully bureaucratic. Imagine the warm buzz of a desert sun, the soft crunch of reed sandals on baked clay, and the distant sound of goats arguing about absolutely nothing. You're in ancient Mesopotamia, yes, the land between the rivers, where human civilization got very excited about inventing taxes before it even got around to inventing the wheel. Here, everything smells faintly of barley mash and goat hair. You're in the city of Ur, or maybe it's Lagash, it's hard to tell, because every building seems to be made of identical beige mud bricks, stacked like ancient Legos under the gaze of a sleepy ziggurat. Merchants holler half-heartedly, scribes hunch over tables, and a rather judgmental donkey keeps staring at your sandals. Now, you probably won't survive this world without a receipt. No joke. In this society, you're no one without proof that your grain, your goat, or your gallon of date beer is properly accounted for. It's like a fantasy RPG, except instead of a sword, you're handed a lump of clay and a stylus. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a narrow alley between low, flat-roofed buildings. The walls on either side are smeared with remnants of old mud plaster, and someone's laundry sags limply across your path, probably linen, if you had to guess, though it could just as easily be finely woven sheep regret. Ahead, the market opens up, humming with a kind of half-awake energy. Everyone here seems to know exactly what they're doing, even though most of it involves sitting around and talking about lentils. And yet, hidden in this sleepy bustle is one of the most world-altering inventions humanity has ever stumbled across, writing. But don't imagine Shakespearean sonnets or legal contracts just yet. No, the first written records weren't poems or prayers, they were receipts. A stout scribe sits behind a small wooden table, the kind that's permanently tilted no matter where you stand. He's rolling a damp lump of clay between his palms, flattening it expertly into a tidy rectangle. Beside him, a stylus, made from a carved reed, rests in a shallow bowl of water to keep it soft. The man's eyes narrow as a merchant approaches and begins muttering about 5 measures of wheat, 2 jars of sesame oil, and 1 rather nervous-looking goat. The scribe listens, nods, and begins to scratch. Tiny wedge-shaped marks fill the surface, each representing a word, a sound, or sometimes an entire concept. The system is called cuneiform, from the Latin word cuneus, meaning wedge, though of course nobody here has ever heard of Latin. Or Rome. Or pizza. You watch as the tablet is finished, hand it over, and wave dry in the sun like laundry. That little clay square now proves the wheat changed hands. It's a promise, an agreement, a receipt, and in this world, it's everything. The materials used are refreshingly simple, clay from the riverbanks, reeds from the marshes, and a bit of time. There's something wonderfully circular about it all, like nature itself wanted people to get obsessive about documenting barley. Mainstream historians agree, the very first writing we've ever found, dating back over 5,000 years to sites like Uruk, mostly lists transactions, who gave what to whom, and how much of it. Forget epic myths. This is basically the birth of Excel. Still, some scholars argue whether the earliest writing was purely economic or also had religious or administrative tones baked in, much like the tablets themselves, which were often literally baked to last longer. The truth? Probably a bit of both. In ancient Mesopotamia, lines between sacred and practical were as blurry as a sheep in a sandstorm. You glance over at another merchant, this one unloading clay pots filled with dried figs. He doesn't hand over his wares until the customer pulls out a matching tablet from his satchel. The 2 men compare their clay squares, nod in synchrony, and go their separate ways. It's all weirdly satisfying. Nearby, a child imitates the scribes by poking a stick into a pile of mud. She's probably 6 or 7, though with all the dirt and barley flour involved, age is difficult to determine. Her stylus technique is questionable, but adorable. She grins at you, then throws the whole thing into a trough. Artistic burnout, perhaps. There's a kind of poetry here, quiet, sunlit lives preserved in the most unassuming way possible. Clay doesn't seem like a high-tech medium, but unlike paper or parchment, it doesn't rot or fade. Thousands of these early receipts have survived, silent but legible, while the people who made them have long turned to dust. And here's a fun little fringe fact, some of these clay tablets still bear fingerprints. Ancient smudges pressed into wet surfaces by distracted scribes or rushed merchants, like little echoes of forgotten thumbs. You wonder if one of them matches the guy across from you, chewing on a fig with no visible hurry. As you drift through the crowd, you hear someone mutter about a delivery gone wrong, apparently someone dropped a sack of lentils into the canal. There's talk of a new receipt being issued to reflect the soggy loss. You smile. Even 5,000 years ago, people were bad at logistics. And as the sun dips slightly lower, casting long shadows from the ziggurat at the city's heart, you get the sense that all of this, every grain counted, every tablet fired, every scribe hunched in concentration, is part of something bigger. A system slowly unfolding. What began as simple memory aids scratched in clay will become the bones of civilization. Bureaucracy may not be exciting, but it built cities, empires, and yes, eventually the DMV. You follow the aroma of warm bread and wet clay toward the towering presence of a ziggurat. It looms like a stepped wedding cake left out in the sun too long, its ancient bricks flaking under centuries of wear. But don't let its crumbling facade fool you, this is the beating administrative heart of the city. And tonight, you're not here to worship. You're here for tax season. Temples in ancient Mesopotamia weren't just places to offer prayers or sacrifice the occasional unlucky goat. They were the central nervous systems of city life, part shrine, part warehouse, part IRS. You climb the uneven steps slowly, because your calves aren't used to this many stairs, and at the top, you're greeted not by chanting priests, but by a desk and a long line of slightly annoyed farmers. Inside, the scent shifts from outdoor dust to something far more bureaucratic, parchmentless paper pushing. Rows of scribes squat on mats, surrounded by baskets of tablets, styluses, and what looks suspiciously like last week's lentils. They aren't praying, they're tallying. Cattle counts. Grain offerings. Temple-owned field yields. One of them has clay under his fingernails, ink smudges on his face, though there's no ink involved, so that's impressive, and the distracted look of someone 2 entries away from a nervous breakdown. You're here to make your own humble offering, 3 jars of barley and a slightly underwhelming chicken. A priest eyes you suspiciously, but ultimately waves you toward the scribes. You step forward, the chicken lets out an accusatory squawk, and the nearest scribe sighs deeply as he flattens a new tablet. He carves in the date, somewhere in the reign of a king with more consonants than vowels, and begins listing your goods. This is no mere donation. You're paying taxes. See, temples in Mesopotamia were also the kingdom's accountants. In fact, most historians agree that the early economy was temple-centric, what scholars call a redistributive system. You'd give your grain to the temple, and in theory, the temple would give some back in wages or rations. In practice, the temple got fat off chicken jars while you got paid in exactly 1 small beer and a loaf of bread that smelled like last week. And if you think this was a voluntary process, let's just say, you wouldn't survive this tax season without documentation. The receipt the scribe hands you is unimpressive to look at, a small palm-sized slab with a few neat rows of cuneiform scratches, but it means everything. It's your proof you paid up, your only protection if temple enforcers show up asking why your name isn't on the chicken ledger. Now, you might ask, why temples? Why not city halls or post offices or something more obviously boring? Well, temples were the only buildings with the infrastructure, staff, and divine authority to handle this sort of task. To the Mesopotamians, the gods had grain quotas. Paying the temple wasn't just civic duty, it was sacred bookkeeping. The priesthood believed the universe worked like an account book, and if you didn't balance your side, floods and famines would come as divine overdraft fees. But not everyone's convinced this system was as theocratic as it looks. Some archaeologists argue whether temples truly ran everything, or if local rulers and merchant guilds had more say behind the scenes. The tablets suggest a tangled mix: temple scribes, royal stewards, private traders, all scribbling away like their clay depended on it. And the scribes, oh, the scribes. These guys were like the elite data analysts of their day, except instead of Excel spreadsheets, they juggled wet dirt and a reed stick. Each had years of training, often starting in boyhood, and their whole job was to document every cow, coin, and kernel of wheat that passed through temple doors. You glance around the room and spot a particularly proud scribe gesturing toward his clay masterpiece, a 3-tablet summary of livestock inflows for the month of Elul. You can't read cuneiform, but you're pretty sure it says something like, "Too many goats," an inquiry. Some tablets, you notice, are sealed into hollow clay spheres, small mud balls that rattle when you shake them. These are early forms of sealed receipts, containing tokens that match the transaction inside. It's a secure system, kind of like encrypting your tax return inside a piggy bank. Out the back door, you find yourself in the temple storerooms. Long corridors stretch out, lined with tightly packed shelves, each stacked high with amphorae, baskets, and yes, more tablets. It's astonishing, like the storage room of an ancient Walmart, minus the fluorescent lights and plus a healthy dose of pigeon. A young assistant scurries by, balancing 2 clay jars and muttering about missing fish rations. You step aside, and your foot lands squarely in a bowl of crushed dates. It squelches. Honestly, the sheer scale of it all is mind-boggling. The temple doesn't just record information, it manages labor, distributes food, handles loans, and maintains a level of paperwork, or claywork, that would make modern accountants weep. Fun fringe fact. Some temples had tablet librarians, whose sole job was to file and retrieve the correct receipt from massive archives. If you lost your receipt, you'd better hope someone liked you enough to dig through 2 decades of baked mud. You return to the plaza below just in time to hear a woman arguing with a merchant about a sheep that allegedly looked considerably fatter the last time it was priced. A scribe is already carving a new tablet, presumably marking client dissatisfaction due to wool-related deceit. The sun lowers behind the city's edge, casting the ziggurat in golden light. You clutch your tablet tightly. It's a small, ugly square, still soft in the middle, but it holds the weight of taxes paid, obligations fulfilled, and one slightly offended chicken's legacy. You take a breath. Civilization smells like damp clay, barley husks, and paperwork. You're up early the next morning, because in ancient Mesopotamia, the workday starts roughly whenever the roosters stop shouting. And speaking of roosters, one just tried to peck your sandal. Welcome back. Today's mission: rations. Specifically, you're collecting your daily beer allowance. Yes, beer. Because in this part of the world, and in this time, beer isn't a weekend indulgence, it's literally part of your wages. Doctors, builders, temple workers, even the guy who sweeps the ziggurat stairs, they all get paid in beer. You weave through the city toward the distribution square, passing reed huts, irrigation ditches, and a woman yelling lovingly at a goat like it's a misbehaving child. Eventually, you arrive at the beer house, not a pub, but more like a controlled ration point. A few low tables, giant ceramic vats, and a couple of clerks with arms dusted in barley flour. You step up, present your receipt, and wait. The clerk squints at the tiny wedges, mutters something about last week's shortage, and finally dips a long-handled ladle into a squat jar. A thick, yeasty liquid drips into your cup, a cloudy amber sludge that smells like bread, sweat, and hope. Mesopotamian beer isn't what you're used to. It's more like a nutritious soup than a drink, thick with fermenting grains and sometimes sweetened with dates. People sip it through long reed straws to avoid the chunks. You try it. It tastes efficient. Historians agree this beer was vital to daily survival. The water supply wasn't always clean, and beer provided calories, hydration, and just enough alcohol to kill off minor regrets. It wasn't recreational, it was sustenance. Like soup that just happens to make you very mellow by lunchtime. Even kids drank it. There's a charming, and slightly unhinged, cuneiform school tablet in which a teacher scolds a lazy student: "You do not know your signs. You drink beer all day." Some things, it seems, never change. But here's the twist: this isn't some casual beer-sipping culture. Every single ration, from barley loaves to beer bowls, is tracked, recorded, and, yes, receipted. The same scribes who wrote up ox deliveries and temple taxes also noted how much beer each worker received. Miss a ladle? There's probably a tablet somewhere with your name on it and the phrase, "1 jar short." You wander over to a shady wall and sip slowly. Around you, others do the same, laughing, muttering, gossiping about last harvest's temple drama. One man is furiously scratching something onto a small tablet using a chicken bone, which is not ideal, but it works in a pinch. A scribe nearby is arguing with a supplier about watered-down beer accusations. The phrase, "very inferior barley product," is mentioned. Apparently, passive-aggressive complaints are older than democracy. And did you know? Some temples employed beer tasters, people whose job was literally to sample each batch before distribution. You imagine their resume: highly trained palate. Immune to disappointment. Must have been a cushy gig, unless you got the batch fermented in a goat's shadow. Modern scholars are still debating how standardized these rations were. Some argue that different jobs earned different types of beer, stronger for priests, weaker for laborers, while others believe it was just about volume. Either way, receipts survive with painfully precise detail: 5 sela of beer to the porter, 2 sela to the singer, 3 sela to the ox driver whose ox wandered off again. Fringe detail. They also issued receipts for beer ingredients: if you took barley or date syrup to make your own batch, that was noted too. The government didn't just want to track your beer, it wanted to track the potential of beer. That's dedication. After finishing your ration, you watch the scribes pack up for the morning. Some of them carefully place today's tablets into a shallow clay box to be sun-dried, others stack them on cloth-lined carts, ready to be baked for permanence. One particularly organized scribe places his name on each tablet with a distinctive signature mark. It's not quite a John Hancock, more like tiny triangle wedge with flourish, but it gets the job done. Then comes a truly relatable moment. A small boy approaches the beer station, receipt in hand, and a clerk frowns. "This is from yesterday," the clerk says. "It's valid," the boy insists. "My dad said he was busy with ox problems." An argument ensues. Eventually, the clerk shrugs and pours a reduced ration. The receipt is marked "late collection, half portion." Somewhere, a clay tablet size. As midday heat starts to swell, you begin to see the bigger picture: beer wasn't just sustenance. It was a data point. An entry in an empire-sized spreadsheet made of mud. Every ration, every delay, every dispute, it all left its mark, pressed in clay and baked by the sun. And this mundane ritual of drink and documentation is what helped Mesopotamian cities function. Without these daily logs, nobody would know who was fed, who owed whom, or why someone's goats kept wandering into the beer line. It was society on a schedule. Civilization with a clay filing system. One last sip, and the day moves on. The beer's gone warm, your receipt is now curling at the edges in the heat, and someone just shouted about a stolen amphora. Another ordinary, thoroughly documented day in the land between two rivers. You find yourself at the edge of the city now, away from the noisy market squares and soggy beer lines, standing beside a small group of scribes who are gathered around something curious, a round lump of clay, about the size of a grapefruit, with faint patterns etched into its surface. One scribe cradles it carefully like it's a precious egg. Another gives it a shake, and sure enough, something rattles inside. This, it turns out, is a bulla. And inside it? Receipts. Or at least, the Mesopotamian prototype of them. Before tablets were a thing, before scribes thought to just write everything down in neat rows, early accountants used clay envelopes to seal tiny tokens that represented trade goods. You didn't get a list of your items, you got a rattling clay ball full of proof. You crouch beside the group as one of them carefully cracks the bulla open. Inside are small geometric tokens, cones, spheres, pyramids. Each one represents something, a jar of oil, a bundle of reeds, maybe a goat if you're lucky. This system dates back to the pre-writing days, around 8000 BCE. That's before writing, before wheels, before even really convincing footwear. And yet, someone still wanted to prove they gave you 3 sheep and not 2. You pick up one of the tokens. It's smooth and faintly warm from the sun, and shaped like a flat disc. That might mean 1 measure of grain or possibly tiny edible hat, depending on the interpretation. Scholars still debate exactly what each token stood for, some align them with accounting categories, others suggest they had more flexible meanings depending on the context. What's fascinating is the evolution. Over time, people realized that sealing the tokens inside a clay envelope was inconvenient. Every time you wanted to check your inventory, you had to smash the whole thing. Not exactly scalable. So eventually, scribes began pressing the shapes of the tokens into the surface of the bulla before sealing it. That way, you could see the transaction from the outside. And that, friends, is where writing began. Historians mostly agree, this transition, from physical tokens to impressed symbols to abstract signs, is one of the clearest examples of how necessity truly mothered invention. You want a record, but you also want to keep your pots intact. Boom, writing. Not for poetry, not for prayers, but for inventory. You're handed a damp slab of clay and invited to try it yourself. You awkwardly press a cone-shaped token into the surface, then try to mimic the mark with the stylus instead. It's harder than it looks. The wedge keeps collapsing. The line wobbles like a drunken caterpillar. A nearby child is absolutely judging you. Still, you get the hang of it. Eventually, your tablet features a somewhat accurate rendering of 2 fish, 1 loaf, and 3 confused goats. Whether it holds up in court remains to be seen. The concept of bulla wasn't just limited to markets. Temples used them, too. So did traveling merchants, estate managers, and occasionally royal households. If it needed counting, it needed tokens. And these weren't just rough placeholders, some were made from fired clay or even carved stone, which suggests they weren't tossed away casually. A well-made token might have lasted years, passed hand to hand like an ancient debit card. Quirky aside. Archaeologists have found sealed bulli in children's graves. No one's quite sure why. Did they represent gifts for the afterlife? Or maybe it was just an early example of giving a kid a toy that rattled. You walk alongside a scribe now, watching as he gathers his daily materials, wet clay, styluses of various thicknesses, a token pouch hanging from his belt like a nerdy coin purse. He's one of the early adopters, ditching bully entirely in favor of full-blown tablets. But he still keeps a few tokens around. Just in case, he mutters. Old habits die hard, even in 2350 BCE. The shift from tokens to writing wasn't overnight. For decades, maybe centuries, people used both systems side by side. You might find a bulla for high-value goods and a tablet for daily rations. Some researchers think tokens were eventually phased out not because they stopped working, but because writing allowed for greater complexity, dates, names, conditions. You could add little insults about the goat's quality. Try doing that with a lump of shaped clay. A young apprentice joins you, her tunic marked with fresh smears of mud and her fingers tapping nervously on a stylus. She carries today's training assignment, record an imaginary shipment of 10 sheep, 4 wheels of cheese, and a traveling bard with substandard sandals. She looks sheepish, no pun intended. The master scribe peers at the tablet, corrects a few marks, and mutters something about sloppy goat wedges. She sighs and starts over. Again. Writing may be divine in origin, but in practice. It's repetitive, dusty, and weirdly competitive. And as the afternoon heat settles in, casting long shadows across the courtyard, you realize that these boring little tasks, marking tokens, impressing symbols, checking for cheese accuracy, are the quiet heartbeat of civilization. People often imagine ancient history as kings and battles and soaring pyramids. But honestly, it's this: clay, repetition, and the low murmur of a tired scribe who just wants the tokens to match. You're back in the heart of the city now, standing outside a long, low building that smells faintly of damp papyrus and overworked ambition. A faded sign scratched into a wooden panel reads something close to Idaba. The House of Tablets. Mesopotamia's Scribe School. You step inside and are immediately hit by a soft thwop, not from an aggressive student, but from the heat-thickened air, heavy with the scent of drying clay and stress. The classroom is full of boys, maybe 9 to 15 years old, all hunched over low benches, grumbling as they etch lines into clay slabs with the world-weariness of accountants twice their age. Welcome to the training ground of the scribal elite. And lucky you, you've been enrolled. A stern teacher waves you over and hands you a fresh tablet. It's still warm, like a mud pie just out of the oven. He points to a line of cuneiform symbols on the wall and barks something that sounds suspiciously like, "Copy that 10 times, and no whining." You nod, pretending confidence, and begin scratching. This isn't school as you know it. There are no recess bells, no art classes, and certainly no participation trophies. Idaba is part boot camp, part library, and part ancient sweatshop for future bureaucrats. You're here to master cuneiform, the wedge-shaped writing system that can turn 5 sheep delivered into no sheep, please file complaint. The daily curriculum includes reciting proverbs, copying legal codes, and learning the difference between similar-looking wedges that, if misused, might accidentally sign away your cousin's house. Mainstream historians generally agree that scribes were among the most respected and feared professions in Mesopotamian society. They were gatekeepers of knowledge, mediators of trade, and, importantly, the ones who decided whether or not your tablet had sufficient wedge density. You look to your left, another student is sweating through a complicated list of barley weights and labor allocations. To your right, someone's been caught doodling a fish with extra legs. The teacher doesn't yell. He just leans over, crushes the clay with one disapproving palm, and drops a new slab in front of the guilty party. Silent rage is a universal language. One of your classmates leans in. "Don't try to get clever with the symbols," he whispers. "Last week a kid tried to invent a shortcut. Now he's learning tax math as punishment." You both shudder. Everywhere you look, the walls are lined with example tablets, copies of famous contracts, royal decrees, ration lists, and the occasional proverb etched in grumpy, all-caps style, "Do not idle." The tablet will not write itself. The tools are simple: a flat stylus made from reed, a damp clay slab, and a lot of repetition. By lunchtime, you've written the phrase, 3 measures of barley for the ox driver, so many times that it's burned into your eyelids. Still, your teacher nods approvingly. "Acceptable wedge depth," he mutters. A high compliment, apparently. There's a running scholarly debate about how many people in Mesopotamian cities were literate. Some think it was only the scribal class, maybe 1% of the population. Others believe merchants and even temple workers had a functional understanding, enough to read a receipt or curse a poorly measured jar. But one thing is clear: to be fully literate in cuneiform was hard. You had to learn hundreds of signs, deal with homophones, and sometimes guess what a symbol meant based on context, mood, and whether Mercury was in retrograde. And yet, people mastered it. Not just to write laws and myths, but to note that Farmer Shulgi delivered 3 scrawny goats instead of 4 fat ones. Fringe fact. Some Idaba tablets have teacher corrections in red ink, a practice that survived thousands of years and every generation's collective dread of grading. Mid-afternoon arrives, and your hands are cramping. The stylus digs into your palm in that oddly specific way shared by every tired student in history. Your current assignment is transcribing a debt contract involving dates, sheep, and a neighbor who may or may not have borrowed both without asking. You scratch carefully, one measure of dried dates to Akka, son of Nana, due by next moon. The teacher walks by, squints at your work, and nods. Don't forget the witness marks, he says. You gulp. Of course. Every contract needed validation, little symbols pressed in by other people to confirm the deal wasn't a drunken goat negotiation. And yes, even these student exercises were sometimes baked and kept. Archaeologists have uncovered classroom dumps full of practice tablets, some with visible teacher comments, others with doodles, and many with glorious mistakes like, the cow borrowed the moon, or, 3 heads of onion per brother. You hear a loud thump from the next room, someone's dropped a full archive box. Tablets go tumbling, and the teacher mutters the Mesopotamian equivalent of every week with these interns. You close your clay tablet carefully, smoothing its edges and placing it on the drying shelf. The satisfaction of a full day's work settles in your shoulders, even if your fingers are coated in a mixture of dust, grit, and something that smells suspiciously like fermented lentils. As the sun lowers behind the rooftops of you step outside and feel the heat radiating off the mud brick walls. Behind you, inside that dim, sweltering schoolroom, the next generation of bean counters is grinding away at wedge perfection. And you've earned your first real scratch in history's long, clay-colored ledger. You're not alone as you shuffle through the city's marketplace the next morning. Everyone from melon vendors to chicken negotiators is out and about, trying to strike a deal before the sun makes bargaining a sweaty ordeal. But you, noble documentarian that you are, have a different destination, the House of Archives. Because even in 2000 BCE, people had to store their paperwork somewhere. Well, not paper. Claywork. The House of Archives isn't flashy. No golden doors or inscribed monuments, just a thick, windowless structure built from sun-dried bricks and guarded by a middle-aged man who looks like he's memorized the layout of 7,000 receipts and can find each one in under 2 minutes. His job title? Clay Librarian. You step inside, and it's cooler than expected. The air smells faintly of dust and time, an oddly comforting combination. Rows upon rows of shelves fill the dim space, each one stacked with hundreds, maybe thousands, of tablets. Some are small enough to hide in a palm. Others are the size of paving stones and appear to contain more legalese than a modern phone contract. You trail behind the archivist as he moves through the collection with surprising speed. He mutters things like, grain tax, Northern District, 12th year of Amar Sin, and pulls a tablet from what looks like a random heap. Magic? No. Just an intricate cataloging system historians still don't fully understand. He hands you the tablet. It's dense with cuneiform, carefully scribed, and fired solid, a permanent record of a temple-to-merchant barley transaction from over a millennium ago. And this isn't a museum piece. This was daily life. Back then, once your receipt was dried, or baked, depending on the level of permanence required, it was filed in a local archive. Temples, city halls, merchant homes, any place that required ongoing records had its own little library of clay. Contracts, marriage agreements, IOUs, land deeds, work rosters, they all ended up here. This particular archive you're exploring likely belonged to a temple complex. Religious institutions were the bureaucratic heavyweights of the era, responsible not just for divine rituals but for managing grain stores, livestock, laborers, and loans. And yes, that meant keeping records on all of it. You flip the tablet over. There's a neat row of witness marks, distinct little seals pressed into the clay, often featuring tiny animal figures, geometric symbols, or even miniature scenes of a man standing smugly next to a pile of sheep. These were personal stamps, often worn on a cord around the neck, used to sign a deal without writing your name. It was the signature ring before signature rings were cool. Fringe tidbit. Some ancient seals doubled as early branding tools. One high-ranking scribe had a seal showing him receiving gifts from the gods. Others went for bolder flair, like the merchant who used a seal featuring a lion devouring a bull. Not exactly subtle. As you walk deeper into the archive, you notice a few tablets that appear different. Softer in color, thinner, and covered in tight script from edge to edge. These are duplicates, clay copies made of important contracts. Think of them as Mesopotamian carbon paper. In high-stakes trades or legal arrangements, both parties got a copy. If someone misplaced theirs, or, more likely, accidentally, buried it in the garden, the archive could produce the twin. And that was no idle threat. If there was a dispute, say, Farmer Lugal claimed he only owed 5 jars of sesame oil, not 7, officials could consult the tablet vault. If your seal matched and the receipt said 7, well, get pouring. One ongoing scholarly debate revolves around how archives were organized. Some researchers believe temples grouped tablets by topic, livestock in one area, grain in another, while others think they were arranged chronologically or even by scribe. Still others argue the system was simply piles, with vague hope. But one thing is certain, these records mattered. We know this because of tablet preservation practices. When particularly valuable tablets were stored, they were sometimes placed inside protective clay envelopes called casings, yes, a tablet inside another tablet. It's like putting your receipts in a manila folder made of mud. Secure, clunky, and very on-brand for bureaucracy. In one corner of the archive, the librarian gestures toward a crate filled with discarded fragments. Breakage was common, and even in the ancient world, clerical errors happened. You pick up a shard that once contained a shipment list for fish. The only visible line reads, 3 baskets of dried fish, one notably smelly. Honest reporting, at least. And then, the strangest thing, tucked into the back of the room, half buried under straw, you find what appears to be a clay, index tablet. It's just a list of other tablet titles. A list of lists. Yes, ancient Mesopotamians invented the filing cabinet and the index. You gently step back into the light of day, blinking against the sun. Your sandals are caked with centuries of dust, your brain slightly fried by wedge overload. But now, you understand something vital. These archives weren't just about counting barley. They were about memory. Continuity. A belief that every sheep traded, every debt paid, and every loan forgiven was worth recording, because if it wasn't written down, did it even happen? You glance back at the quiet archive building. It may look dull, but it holds the dreams, deals, and disputes of a city long gone. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear the scribes murmuring through the walls. Double-check your seal. We don't want another goat incident. You're sitting now beneath a woven reed awning, sipping something cool made from date syrup and wondering how your life has come to revolve entirely around paperwork made of mud. Around you, the city of Ur buzzes, temple workers rush between errands, vendors shout lazily over the scent of roasting onions, and the sharp clack of styluses tapping against clay provides a surprisingly rhythmic soundtrack. Your mission today? Witness the social side of receipts. Because as it turns out, not all cuneiform was about taxes or goat deliveries. Some of it. Petty drama, contractual weddings, and good old-fashioned IOUs. A young couple approaches a scribe with a tablet in hand, both dressed in their finest linen. You squint and realize, this isn't just another receipt for lentils. It's a marriage contract. That's right, even love had paperwork. The scribe, wearing a ring with a tiny lion carved into it, asks the usual questions, dowry details, bride price, living arrangements. The groom stammers when asked about goats. The bride raises an eyebrow. You get the sense he may have overpromised. The scribe sighs, begins writing, and the couple presses their seals into the clay with ceremonial gravity. Love, sealed in wedges. Historians agree that Mesopotamian marriages weren't just emotional unions, they were economic partnerships, carefully recorded with receipts for everything from the gifts exchanged to the number of jars of oil the bride brought with her. It wasn't romantic, per se, but it was legally airtight. Nearby, a rowdy debate breaks out between two merchants. One claims to have sold a batch of perfectly functional bronze sickles. The other says they were shaped like bent fish. The scribe gets involved, reviewing the transaction tablet from earlier in the week. Turns out, the receipt clearly lists the sickles as lightly flawed, a detail someone conveniently forgot. The argument fizzles. Clay wins again. And it's not just buyers and brides who needed documentation. You watch as a temple servant approaches to settle a months-old debt, 5 measures of barley borrowed during a particularly lean festival week. The scribe checks the debt register, cross-references a repayment note, and finally scribes a new tablet, debt repaid. Temple holds no further claim. A seal is pressed. The servant exhales like someone's lifted a bull off his shoulders. Quirky side fact. There are receipts for breakups. Okay, not the emotional kind, but contract annulments. One tablet reads, the marriage between Dagon's daughter and Luaya is dissolved. Dowry returned. 2 witnesses present. There's a certain cold elegance to it, like a clay-shaped prenup in reverse. As you wander past more scribes, you notice something unexpected, a teenager grinning while holding up a particularly neat receipt. His friend claps him on the back. You sneak a look. It's a loan record for a small herd of ducks. The recipient? Enlil Bani, future herder. The clay reads more like a badge of honor than a bill. A first loan. A first business. Someone's making their start. You settle near an elderly woman watching all this with mild amusement. She points to a spot on her necklace, where a small cylinder seal hangs from a string. 40 years, she says, tapping it. Every land lease, every grain deal, I used this. You ask her what happens if you lose your seal. She cackles. Then your cousin makes terrible deals in your name and you get blamed for 10 missing donkeys. She might be joking. You're not sure. There's a tablet next to her, shaped slightly differently, taller, narrower. It's a letter. Yes, letters in clay. Written to her sister in another city. The clay is scored faintly along the back so it could be folded neatly before baking. And inside? A gentle scolding, you still owe me the blue tunic. I know you have it. Scholars still debate how common personal messages were on clay. Some think they were rare, reserved for elites. Others believe casual correspondence was everywhere, and we just haven't found the backyard tablet pits full of cousin gossip and shopping lists. Speaking of gossip, you hear a pair of market women talking about the fig seller who shorted the temple. It's unclear what was shorted, figs, coin, decency, but apparently there's a whole saga. One even claims she saw the tablet herself, signed by 3 temple scribes and marked with disappointment. Bureaucracy, it seems, has always loved passive aggression. The sun rises higher, casting odd shadows across the walls. You watch a young girl delivering a clay tablet to a merchant across the square. He scans it briefly, nods, then hands her a bag of dried onions. A standard transaction, receipt in, onions out. But here's a subtle moment, she pauses, asks him to mark a new receipt noting, double weight, per temple order. He complies, amused. She walks off triumphant, onion sack swinging. Somewhere, her supervisor will read that wedge and smile knowingly. Efficiency wins. You begin to see receipts not just as records, but as stories. Each line pressed into clay captures more than numbers, it reveals tensions, aspirations, and small triumphs. One person pays a debt. Another claims a dowry. A third settles a feud over cracked pots. And every moment is logged, sealed, and stored with reverent dullness. As you lean back against the wall, the day's energy humming softly around you, it hits you, these weren't just administrative tools. They were the glue of daily life. They made invisible agreements visible. And they gave people, however ordinary, a voice carved in earth. The heat is soft now, like a warm hand pressed gently over the city. As evening settles in, you find yourself wandering away from the bustle of the main square, past quiet courtyards and sleepy goats, until you reach the edge of town, where fields stretch wide and the real production begins. This is the source, the farms, workshops, and herding camps that feed the tablets you've been chasing all week. Before anything could be recorded, it had to happen. And here, under the open sky and amidst the scent of turned earth and sheep dung, you begin to understand how receipts really came to life. You join a group of field workers who are busy sorting grain into baskets. It's not glamorous, but it's rhythmic. One scoops. One counts. One nods at you and gestures for help. You're now the official basket holder for the day, an honorable role, if one that attracts the occasional bug. Every few minutes, a young boy jogs up with a clay tablet. It's already etched with a delivery order from the temple granary, 12 baskets, red wheat, for brewer's allotment. He checks the count, nods, then seals the tablet with a tiny roll press impression, a lion wrestling a snake. Dramatic. This is the chain: temple issues a request, workers fill it, a scribe records it, and the goods are then carted off, followed, of course, by the tablet. Because even in the middle of a dusty field, you needed proof. No tablet. No trust. No trust. No beer. Mainstream historians agree that this system, the coordination between temple institutions and agricultural labor, was one of the most advanced bureaucracies of the ancient world. Ur wasn't just a city of priests and potters. It was a supply chain, with clay at every link. Fringe tidbit. In one stash of tablets, archaeologists found notes where scribes complained that farmers were eating the inventory. Imagine that, someone trying to fudge numbers by nibbling a few extra dates. The more things change. You head toward a weaving compound next. Dozens of women and children sit together in a shaded courtyard, spinning thread and knotting textiles with quick, practiced hands. A forewoman pauses to show you her inventory tablet. It's covered in neat rows listing lengths of wool, colors used, and hours worked. At the bottom is a symbol you don't recognize, a little fish over a doorway. She laughs. That's the foreman's personal seal, she says. He wanted something memorable. He smells like fish, so. And there's that note of everyday humor again. Amid wedges and math, people still found ways to express personality, through seals, scribbles, and the occasional sarcastic tablet margin like, if returned, add 1 goat for my trouble. You pass by a brickmaking crew next. Each team of workers has a tally tablet pinned to a stick beside their work area. Every 50 bricks. 1 mark added. It's not just about pay, it's about tracking productivity. And if someone's numbers look suspiciously high, a senior scribe drops by with the driest line in Mesopotamian HR history: let us verify your wedges. Scholars still debate how often these numbers were manipulated. Some argue that local overseers exaggerated outputs to curry favor. Others believe undercounting was the bigger issue, especially when rations were tied to quotas. Either way, the receipt tablet was king. Without it, your hard day's labor could vanish like desert wind. You reach a narrow stable where animals are being loaded for temple transport. Oxen, donkeys, the occasional wobbly-legged goat. Each animal has its own record, yes, really. Tablets noting age, condition, and purpose. 1 tablet casually notes, 2 goats, aggressive. Recommend relocation. You make a mental note to avoid the goat pen. An older scribe overseeing the corral sees you looking and hands over a receipt from earlier that morning. It simply reads, 6 donkeys received. 1 limped. Noted. It's signed, sealed, and now rests in your slightly sunburnt hands. You can't help but smile. So much ceremony, for a limping donkey. Still, it mattered. Every beast had a role, and every role needed a record. The scribes weren't just bureaucrats, they were lifelines. If a shipment vanished, it wasn't just a problem. It was a mystery to be solved in clay. Evening turns to dusk. Workers begin to drift home. Children tug at mothers' sleeves, dogs bark half-heartedly at passing carts, and a few last tablets are exchanged, quiet gestures of responsibility, ritual, and relief. One man, brushing clay from his arms, shows you his personal stash, 5 tablets bundled together with twine, each marking wages owed over the last month. He keeps them tucked in a woven pouch, along with a small carved seal showing a bird in flight. "Just in case anyone forgets what I'm worth," he says with a grin. You sit beside him, watching the sky shift from gold to blue. Behind you lies a city of temples, archives, and scribal schools. But out here, this is the clay's origin. Every receipt begins with a goat, a basket, a brick. And you begin to see it clearly now. The Mesopotamian receipt wasn't just a tool of the elite. It was a living record of daily effort. Whether you were hauling dates or weaving cloth, your work deserved to be seen, and remembered. Even if, in the end, all that remains is a baked square of mud, marked with care, tucked into time. The night has fallen softly now, and you find yourself back in the city, but this time wandering toward the quieter quarters where scribes live and study. The streets are calm, lit only by flickering oil lamps and the occasional glint of moonlight on polished clay tablets drying in the open air. You pause outside a modest home where a young apprentice scribe is practicing his craft. His fingers are stained with clay dust, and his stylus moves slowly but steadily across a soft tablet. You watch as he carefully forms each wedge, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration. It's like watching an artist perfect a brushstroke, but here, every wedge is a word, a contract, a promise. Scribes were the celebrities of their day, well, the quiet kind of celebrity who never made a fuss but wielded immense power. They could make or break a deal, settle disputes, and even influence politics, all with the stroke of a stylus. And as you look closer, you realize this young apprentice is learning more than just writing, he's mastering the art of trust. Historians still argue whether scribes were primarily temple employees or if many worked independently as freelance record keepers. Either way, their training was intense. From childhood, apprentices memorized hundreds of signs, practiced on wet clay, and learned complex accounting and legal codes. It wasn't just writing, it was a lifetime vocation. One curious fact that rarely makes it into history books is the use of mnemonic devices to help scribes remember lengthy lists of signs and procedures. Some training tablets include riddles or rhymes, cleverly embedded to ease the learning process. Imagine memorizing tax codes with a catchy tune, it might have made record-keeping a bit more fun. You ask the apprentice about the most challenging part of his job. He smiles shyly and shows you a tablet full of corrections, lines erased, wedges recarved. Mistakes were common and costly. Since clay tablets were usually baked to harden once the text was finalized, errors meant starting over or hoping the client was forgiving. Nearby, a more experienced scribe is dictating a receipt for a shipment of dates. His tone is calm but firm, and he insists that every detail, from quantity to quality, be precise. A receipt isn't just proof, he says quietly. It's a promise between people. You nod, realizing that this quiet promise echoes across millennia. In another room, you glimpse a scribal library filled with tablets that serve as textbooks, dictionaries, and even literature. Scribes studied these for years, honing their skill not just in writing but in understanding the nuances of language and law. Some tablets contain poetry and hymns, evidence that writing was as much an art as a tool. One scholar's debate revolves around whether scribes were the only literate members of society or if merchants and temple officials also learned to write. The general consensus leans toward scribes holding a near monopoly on literacy, which only enhanced their status and influence. As the night deepens, the apprentice shows you his personal seal, a small cylinder carved with intricate geometric patterns. He rolls it across a soft clay surface, leaving behind a crisp, repeating design. It's his mark, his identity, his signature. You think back to the earlier archives filled with seals, each a small story. For some, it was power, for others, pride. For the apprentice, it's a promise to himself that one day, he too will contribute to the endless record of human life. You leave the quiet scribal quarters with a new appreciation for these unsung keepers of history. Without them, the barley deliveries, marriage agreements, and even the quirky complaints about stubborn goats might have been lost to time. As you step back into the moonlit streets, the city feels different, not just a place of stone and clay, but a living archive of stories etched in mud and memory. The gentle hum of early morning greets you as you drift toward the bustling marketplace, where the aroma of fresh bread and crushed herbs mingles with the earthiness of the clay tablets being exchanged. This market is more than a place of commerce, it's where the stories embedded in those receipts come alive. You weave through stalls laden with dates, onions, and freshly woven textiles. Merchants shout softly, bargaining not to disturb the peace but to remind each other that business is still business. Near the center, a scribe sits under a canopy, carefully reading a tablet that looks older than some of the weathered stones around you. This particular tablet is a receipt for a delivery of rare lapis lazuli, a precious blue stone prized for its beauty and supposed protective powers. The receipt meticulously notes the weight, origin, and intended recipient, the temple of Inanna herself. Imagine being the person trusted to move such treasure, and then to prove, with a clay slab, that it reached its destination intact. A quirky detail catches your eye. One tablet mentions 3 servants' laughter recorded during unloading. You blink. Laughter recorded? Indeed, some tablets include unusual annotations, light moments amidst the dry details. These could be scribal jokes, personal notes, or just little flourishes to humanize an otherwise sterile record. You overhear a vendor explaining how these receipts sometimes doubled as letters of credit, allowing merchants to borrow goods or money in one city and repay elsewhere. It's an early form of banking, ancient credit lines backed by trusted clay. You pause, imagining a Mesopotamian version of your modern wallet, except, instead of plastic cards, it's all about sealed tablets and personal seals. Historians still argue how widespread this credit system really was. Some suggest it was limited to elite merchants and temple officials. Others believe everyday traders had access too, making UR a surprisingly interconnected economic hub. Nearby, a woman tends a small stand selling fragrant oils and woven baskets. She shows you a receipt tablet signed by several family members. It details a loan for weaving supplies, with repayment scheduled after the next market day. It's a reminder that even everyday people use these records to keep promises and manage livelihoods. You note that many of these tablets are small, pocket-sized, and worn from handling. The physicality of them contrasts sharply with today's digital transactions, where everything feels weightless and invisible. Here, the receipt was something you could hold, feel, even smell, the scent of baked clay mingling with the marketplace dust. Suddenly, a loud, but good-natured argument breaks out between 2 merchants over a shipment of barley. One claims the grain was dusty and dull, while the other insists it met temple standards. A scribe steps in, consulting the original delivery receipt. It records, grain quality, satisfactory. The merchants grumble but accept the ruling. This moment, mundane yet rich, reveals the practical power of receipts. They weren't just bureaucratic relics, they were tools for fairness, evidence in disputes, and anchors of trust in a world without instant communication. As the sun climbs higher, the market fills with a soft rhythm, the tap of sandals, the murmur of voices, the occasional clink of a seal pressed into fresh clay. You realize that behind every transaction, there's a story, hopes, frustrations, and tiny acts of human connection. You tuck a small, blank tablet into your satchel, an invitation to imagine your own receipt in this ancient city, a humble witness to the daily dance of life and commerce, forever etched in clay. As the sun begins its slow descent, you wander toward the quieter outskirts of the city, where the daily bustle fades into the soft sounds of livestock and distant prayers. This is the realm of temple officials and accountants, those who handle the mountain of receipts and records that keep UR's many systems in balance. You find yourself inside a large, cool archive chamber. Shelves lined with countless clay tablets stretch as far as the eye can see, each one a snapshot of a transaction, a delivery, or a tax record. The air smells faintly of baked clay and old parchment, if parchment existed here, and the occasional hint of incense burned to protect the sacred knowledge. You pick up a tablet carefully, feeling its weight, and begin to trace the wedges carved into its surface. These records were not just thrown together. They were organized meticulously by date, by type, by commodity. This archive was the heartbeat of the city's administration. Historians still argue whether these archives were primarily for religious temples or also served secular authorities. The answer is probably both, as temples often doubled as economic centers, lending goods and money, and keeping accounts on behalf of the city-state. A peculiar fact emerges: some tablets include error reports, where scribes noted mistakes in earlier records, sometimes adding humorous comments like, "Scribe forgot how to count," or "Numbers seem drunk." Even in the solemn task of record-keeping, there was room for personality, and maybe a little scribal frustration. You notice that some receipts were duplicated, one copy for the temple, one for the merchant, and a third possibly for the transporters. This triplicate system helped avoid disputes. If a shipment went missing, everyone had their own proof. Among the tablets, you spot a ledger recording the delivery of precious oils used for anointing statues and priests. It details not only quantities but even the scent qualities, showing how refined these ancient accounting practices could be. A reminder that receipts also preserved culture and ritual, not just commerce. You overhear two archivists debating whether all tablets were baked or if some were kept soft for amendments. The baked ones were permanent, but soft tablets allowed for corrections. Imagine a notebook that could be erased before finalizing. This flexibility was crucial for accuracy, but also meant some records might be lost over time. You pause to consider the human side of these archives. Each tablet was crafted by a person with a stylus, a job, and a story. Whether a young apprentice nervously practicing or a seasoned scribe jotting down hundreds of entries daily, these tablets were their legacy. With a final glance, you place the tablet back carefully. This archive isn't just a collection of receipts, it's a vast, living memory of a society that valued order, trust, and transparency. You step outside as twilight deepens, carrying with you the quiet reverence of those ancient keepers of knowledge, whose humble records continue to speak across millennia. Night deepens, and the city's heartbeat slows to a gentle rhythm. You find yourself back in the residential quarters, where families gather for quiet dinners and children listen to stories by oil lamps. Here, receipts don't just reflect commerce, they reveal social bonds, obligations, and even moments of generosity. You sit beside an elderly woman who pulls out a bundle of worn tablets tied with a simple cord. She explains these are her family's financial records spanning decades, loans given and repaid, goods borrowed and returned, and occasionally, tablets noting gifts without expectation of return. One such tablet records a loan of grain to a neighboring family after a poor harvest, with the repayment scheduled for the following year. It's signed by both parties, their seals pressed carefully, a pact not just of debt but of community support. This act of neighborly kindness, preserved in clay, is a beautiful counterpoint to the image of ruthless ancient bureaucracy. It reminds you that behind every receipt, there were human relationships, often complex and layered. Historians still debate the extent to which these informal agreements were common. Were receipts mainly tools of the powerful, or did ordinary people use them to maintain trust and balance within their communities? The evidence leans toward the latter, painting a picture of a society that relied on written records for both law and love. You notice that some tablets include marginal notes with phrases like, "May the gods bless this agreement," or, "In friendship, we trust." These blessings suggest that receipts were not merely transactional but had spiritual weight, reinforcing social bonds. A quirky detail emerges. One tablet amusingly notes that a debtor forgot to bring the correct number of goats and offered a goat-shaped figurine as compensation. The creditor accepted it with a smile, and the tablet records the exchange with a hint of good humor. As the woman recounts these stories, you realize how receipts bridged the personal and the official. They captured moments of negotiation, compromise, and even humor, making the dry clay tablets feel warm and alive. Outside, the soft murmur of the city at rest mingles with the occasional clatter of a late-night vendor packing up. The cool night air carries a faint scent of baking bread and drying reeds, grounding you in this ancient world of everyday miracles. You tuck the stories and tablets into your mind like treasures, aware that the invention of the receipt was not just a bureaucratic milestone but a testament to human connection and the desire to be remembered. The city grows quieter still, and you wander toward the river's edge, where the Tigris flows lazily under a starry sky. Along the banks, fishermen mend their nets and trade goods, their own receipts sealed in small clay tokens. This watery border reminds you how trade and record-keeping extended beyond the city walls, reaching far into distant lands. You imagine a merchant loading a boat with jars of olive oil and baskets of wool, bound for cities across the Fertile Crescent. His receipt, carefully crafted, details every item and its value, promising delivery somewhere hundreds of miles away. It's remarkable that such trust could stretch across such distances, anchored by these humble clay records. One fascinating detail is that some receipts were tied to specific trade routes, like the ancient silk routes later famous in Asia. These routes required complex coordination, and receipts helped track goods as they passed through multiple hands. Imagine the relief when a scribe finally checks a receipt after a long journey to confirm that the shipment is intact. Historians still debate how standardized these receipts were across regions. Did merchants traveling from UR to distant cities have to adapt to local styles, or was there a universal system understood by all? Evidence suggests a mix, with some common formats but regional variations, kind of like dialects in a language. Nearby, a boat captain shows you a unique type of receipt sealed inside a waterproof clay envelope, a clever ancient solution to keep records safe from river moisture. You can almost hear the splash of water as these tablets were passed from hand to hand along the docks. Another curious practice involved clay passports, or tokens that merchants carried to gain entry into foreign markets. These weren't receipts per se, but related documents ensuring merchants' rights and protections, linked closely with the record-keeping system. You feel the gentle tug of the river, the soft splash of oars, and the faint smell of reeds and mud. It's a reminder that receipts were more than static records, they were part of a dynamic system supporting the vibrant flow of goods, people, and ideas. As you watch a small boat glide away under the moonlight, you realize the invention of the receipt was a quiet revolution that helped ancient civilizations weave together vast networks of trust, long before emails or smartphones. With a final glance at the tranquil river, you prepare to leave this scene, carrying the whispers of merchants and scribes who helped shape history, one careful wedge at a time. The city is nearly asleep now, but you find yourself drawn to the quieter corners where artisans and craftsmen work by flickering lamplight. Here, receipts take on a different character, capturing trades not of grain or goods, but of skill and creativity. You enter a modest workshop filled with the scent of wet clay, bitumen, and smoldering oils. A potter shapes a delicate vase, while nearby a metalworker tempers bronze for a new tool. Their receipts record commissions and payments, often negotiated in the soft glow of friendship as much as commerce. One unusual tablet details a barter exchange, a dozen pottery jars for a set of finely crafted bronze knives. It's a reminder that receipts weren't limited to cash transactions, ancient Mesopotamians understood value in many forms. Historians still debate how formalized these artisan transactions were. Did craftspeople typically rely on written receipts, or were many deals sealed by handshake and trust? Archaeological finds suggest a mix, with some craftsmen meticulous about records and others more informal. You notice that some receipts include small drawings, a pot here, a knife there, giving a visual clue to the transaction. This blend of writing and imagery hints at an early form of documentation accessible even to those less literate. A quirky detail catches your eye. A receipt humorously notes that a potter promised to make the jar not leak like last time, showing a light-hearted acknowledgement of past mistakes. It's a small but vivid human touch amidst the routine accounting. You overhear a craftsman explaining how receipts helped apprentices prove their work's value, important when moving between masters or opening their own shops. These records were proof of skill as much as payment. The workshop feels alive with quiet energy, hands shaping clay and metal, voices discussing deals, and tablets waiting to be baked into permanence. Each receipt here is a small testament to the artistry and economy intertwined in daily life. As you leave, the scent of clay and oil lingers softly, a sensory echo of this intimate world where creativity met commerce under the watchful eyes of scribes and gods alike. The night is deep now, and you find yourself back at the city's grand temple, the center of spiritual life and economic power. Here, receipts played a crucial role not only in trade but in sacred offerings and rituals. You stand before a priest carefully inscribing a receipt for a shipment of barley intended for the temple's daily bread offerings. This receipt is more than a record, it's a spiritual contract, ensuring that the gods receive their due portion and that the community's prayers are supported by tangible acts. Historians still argue how much temples controlled the economy, whether they were mere recipients of goods or active participants in trade and lending. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, with temples as powerful economic hubs shaping the city's life. You notice that some receipts are accompanied by prayers or blessings, invoking deities to watch over transactions and ensure fairness. This blending of the sacred and the practical reminds you that in ancient Mesopotamia, commerce and religion were deeply intertwined. One curious tablet details a donation of fine fabrics to the temple, noting the donor's hopes for health and prosperity. These receipts were as much about social status and piety as about goods exchanged. You overhear a debate between priests about whether all temple receipts were strictly enforced or sometimes symbolic gestures. It's a reminder that even in ancient bureaucracy, flexibility and interpretation played their part. As the temple bells toll softly, you reflect on the invention of the receipt as a quiet miracle, an unassuming tool that helped build trust, organize society, and preserve stories. With a deep breath, you let the temple's calm wash over you. The city sleeps, its countless transactions etched in clay, a testament to human ingenuity and the timeless need to be remembered. Now, as you settle in for rest, imagine the thousands of tiny clay promises resting silently in archives, marketplaces, and homes, each one a whisper from the past, inviting you to dream. As we close this journey through the invention of the receipt, let your mind soften. The ancient city's sounds fade to a gentle hush, the flicker of oil lamps dimming to a slow, steady glow. Imagine the warm weight of a clay tablet in your hands, cool to the touch, carrying the stories of those who came before. You've wandered markets and temples, workshops and archives, tracing the quiet revolution of trust and record-keeping. Feel the calm of a world where every promise was made visible, tangible, a gesture of connection spanning time. Let your breath slow, your thoughts ease, and the gentle cadence of history's unfolding lull you into peaceful rest. The past holds you softly now, a steady companion in the quiet night. Sweet dreams.